Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today, as you can see, we are in the Great Smoky Mountains and we're getting ready for an epic adventure. So let's roll the intro and get right to it. Okay, wasn't that a beautiful drive into the Smoky Mountains? But now we're going to top it. We're going to go into Cades Cove. Now, this is one of the most popular stops in the Smoky Mountains because it is a scenic one-way loop. So there are several historic buildings along the way that we can stop in at and some beautiful viewpoints. And this is also where they most frequently spot some of the wildlife. So we're about to head out right here where we're seeing some of the other traffic go into Cades Cove. Now, as you're rolling through the Cades Cove area, this first part is usually where you can find some of the horses. But then as you get a little deeper, that's where we start to find more and more of the critters. I did see some turkeys off in the distance. They were a little far for me to get to show you guys, but this area is beautiful. And this is also where you're going to encounter a lot more of the traffic. So sometimes this can get kind of bottled down. I will say this, they do have lots of pull-offs, and if you're interested in looking around, definitely take advantage of them because otherwise the line can get quite long behind you. Also, one other thing, in this area there's lots of signs saying stay at least 50 yards away from deer, elk, and also bears. So yeah, do that. Definitely do that. Now, our first stop today is going to be at the historic Methodist church, which has been a staple in the Cades Cove area for quite some time. It's absolutely beautiful, it's amazing, and it's right literally from where we're parked to right there. Now, as you can see, the church itself is pretty vast, and this would have held a large congregation. Now, just beside the church is actually a graveyard, and these are some of the families from the community that might have attended services here. Typically, if you were buried next to a church, you would have had to be affiliated with that particular church in order to be buried here. But there are about 100, I think, here altogether, and some of them date back into some pretty recent years. Now, we're not going to fully explore all of the graves here today, but again, all of these people had to have been associated in some way, shape, or form with this community or this church in order to be buried here. So you'll find a variety of different years before and after this became a park in the 30s. So like, for example, right here, we have some that were buried here in around 1912, and then a little bit across the way over there, we have some that I think were even in the 70s, so much more recently. It really is kind of wild to think that, you know, in the middle of a national park like that, you could have a church and also a graveyard, right? It might be a little hard to tell, but we're probably 20-25 cars deep right now. Yeah, all those people that had stopped off at the first stop have definitely made it down here now. So they're all stacking up. Either that or we have an animal sighting somewhere. That's usually whenever you'll find a really long line of people. Said it before, probably will say it again. Make sure you aren't in a rush whenever you come in Smoky Mountains. Just take your time, be patient, and take in the views. The last time that I was here, I was almost at this very point when I saw a bunch of elk just kind of start to graze across. So you never know what you'll find, and sometimes going at this very slow pace allows you to see the little things that you might miss, like a hawk that's flying overhead, or a deer, or a fox, a coyote, a bear. Our next stop is another church. Now, the last time that I was here, I could not stop here because they were quite literally having a funeral at this church. What? Like I told you, this site, despite the fact that it has been, you know, a historic site for quite some time, they still do have services that are sometimes offered here. And if there is a person who is attached to the community, they can still have their service right here in this church. So let's go inside and see what it looks like. Now, as you can see from this one, the design is a lot different than the Methodist church. We have a different kind of ceiling. The pews are similar, but even the little alcove up here is different. And I don't see a piano anywhere either, but they have hymnals, which means that this is a lot of a cappella going on. But one thing that was really unsettling about this particular chapel was we noticed that there was actually some Sharpie on the pulpit from today, literally from today. That's not okay, guys. Never leave your mark on a historic site. It's not your site to tell the story of, it's theirs. Now, this also has an area where people are recently and not so recently buried, and there is a path around. It does ask that you stay completely and totally on the trail. And guys, I really don't mean to harp on my videos about the destruction of property. I really don't. I'm just sad whenever I see it because I come to these places and try to bring them to you at home so we can cherish them and learn and grow and enjoy. But it's hard to see that and not say something, you know? I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but the line goes all the way around the corner. So way over there. And it's just like non-stop today. Now, while Cades Cove is usually pretty packed, this is the most packed I've seen it. But at the same time, I get it, it's beautiful. So if you're looking for a scenic tour that's going kind of slow, it's perfect. If you're looking for something that's only gonna take you 20-30 minutes, probably not where you want to come in the Smokies. Now, about halfway around the Cades Cove loop, there's actually a pull-off that you can take that has restrooms and a small visitor center and a historic village. Now, there are several different buildings here that we can look at. The only thing they do recommend is make sure that you're kind of watching around the base, because sometimes there can be snakes, and you know, we don't like those. So we're gonna go ahead and put on our mask and have it on, because we are gonna be a little bit closer to people. So we're gonna be proactive and follow the rules. Okay, this is what the area looks like as a whole. And as you can see, it's pretty popular. It's late in the afternoon, there's still a lot of people here. Tons of different buildings to go inside and learn a little bit more about the residents of Cades Cove. Now, of course, you've seen one of these before probably, but if you haven't and you're tuning in for the first time, this is actually how they would grind down sorghum. And then sorghum would be used for a variety of different products within their day-to-day life. Everything from syrups and molasses to other household things. Now, if you wanted something that was super sweet, you could bite into a piece of the sorghum cane and it would have this super, almost candy taste to it. And so that was quite the treat, I'm sure, to make the hard day worth of work a little bit more, you know, pleasurable. This has a very small door, but when we duck down, we can get a great view of what might have been in this building. This looks like they might have held some of the meats in there. And then also they have a little trough. Now, since my last visit to Cades Cove, they have repainted and it's looking wonderful. This nice maroon trim on a white farmhouse. This house is looking A1 right now. They've also made a few other improvements just to preserve. Like over at the mill, the water's running again. When I was here last time, it wasn't. They were actually putting some new boards up so it could hold the water better, so it could push down. Even in this room, you can see they've made improvements to keep the foundation in check so that we can continue to come and see these properties. They want to make it safe so we can come in and enjoy ourselves, learning a little bit about the past. The interesting thing about each one of these properties is you can actually come in and see markers like these, and it tells you a little bit more about who might have lived here, or who might have worked the land here, or what the building might be. And these are so informative, and it tells you the story of the past of Cades Cove. So that's kind of how this property works. So for example, this one tells us this was the Becky Cable house, and Legion Gregg purchased the land from J.P. Cable. Built this house in 1879 with lumber from the cable mill, which is attached to the property here. Okay, and then it shows you what the property might have looked like at the time. It wasn't always white with maroon trim. It looks like it was just a natural color, but there it is. Now, inside the old home place, the hearth was a big deal because in the earlier days, they would use these as cooking, as a way to dry clothes during the winter months, things like that. And it would also heat the home. But as you can see, this one also has a more modern stove that actually pipes out into what would have been the top part of the chimney here. So see that right there? It goes right into that chimney flume and then goes out the top. Just to the side, we have a little covered porch area. This would have been a nice breezeway area to get some ventilation during the hot summer sticky months. So they could come out here and potentially put a bed for someone to stay, like right here, or maybe some rocking chairs. They might also have some of their kitchen duties done out in this area as well. And then here we learn exactly who Aunt Becky was. She was born in 1844 in Carter County, Tennessee. She was one of 9 children and she moved here in 1868. She bought the house in 1887 and she lived here until 1940. And then this right here is Aunt Becky. And an even more exciting fact is it actually tells you what she liked to do, how large the farm was, and also where she can be found now in her final resting place. Then of course inside this room here, this might have been used as a bedroom. You can see there's another fireplace to keep them warm at night. But this does have the decorative windows, so it could also allow for some ventilation during the hot months. Okay guys, we are off to the mill, and the mill is just a couple hundred feet away from the farmhouse and the barn, and the water's flowing nice today, so we should be able to see kind of how the mill worked. And they did use a water wheel, which is a little bit different than Mingus Mill, which is on another portion of the park. The water wheel was actually considered to be a little bit slower, so they wouldn't be able to turn out quite as much product. It was a little bit less expensive to build though, and that's why many of the mills that you see today have water wheels as opposed to generators, which would have to be special ordered. So these would be what would grind down the corn. These are the millstones right here. And they would have different kinds of millstones that they would use. This one looks pretty new, and the corn would get stuck in these little grooves and it would grind up against it and it would make into fine powder. Now how did they get the water to the mill? Through a flume like this, right here. They would basically channel the water from the stream or a river, and it would come down, and as it would gather momentum, it would hit the wheel and it would turn the wheel, and the wheel would then in fact turn the grindstones, and that's how the mill would work. A much larger barn than the last. This one looks like it has a hay loft up top, which means that they could store excessive amounts of products that they might have stocked up on as well. So hay for the horses, the cattle, bedding for the pigs, extra feed for the chickens, anything that they could possibly need, they would have space to store that to get them through the harsh winters, because it snows here. So you want to keep in mind that everything that they had, they either had to get themselves because they bought it from the store, which was far away by the way, or they had to harvest it themselves and work for it. So here you go. This would have been essential. Built right on the waterway, it just kind of makes sense. Most of the farms would need to have the ability to have fresh water for cooking and for cleaning, but also for watering their crops and their livestock. This also gave them enough water to be able to control the mill over here. So all in all, the water was a necessity. And that's why a lot of times as we're going around the Smoky Mountains, we find these homes right next to the waterways, because that was the most valuable resource that they could possibly have. Of course, mind you, as we're going around to these different sites, not all of these buildings are in exactly the same spot that they might have been. We've seen a few that have been relocated, and typically they place on the sign near the building if it's been relocated and where it came from. So be on the lookout for those guys. Definitely be on the lookout. Now, as we come back toward the parking lot, there is a sign here that talks about the early mountain community, and it talks about how this would have been a 1900s style community right here. They do have sometimes people out here showing you how different things work as well. That is one of those things that you'll have to check in advance for. It's not all the time, but it is pretty interesting when they do it. And they do also mention the Cove Tour book, which they actually have right here. And these are only $1. They tell you a lot more about Cades Cove. And as you're going around the scenic tour in that slow motion that we were talking about, you can find out a lot of interesting facts. So I definitely encourage you guys to pick one of these up. Hey, my guy, what you doing? Hi. So for the past hour, we have been in literal gridlock. And that's what happens whenever you find a bear. So what happens is, typically if a bear is spotted, there's a ranger who comes out and they will kind of direct traffic so that you can still maneuver through, but then they spot the bear. They also make sure that people don't get too close because it can be very dangerous. There's signs saying 50 yards, but they really prefer you to be further than that. Now, we are finally getting to go now, and we've, like I said, literally been sitting almost completely still for the past hour. So if you're here later in the afternoon, that's when they start moving around a little bit more. You are more likely to see a bear or elk or deer, but you're also going to be sitting in probably longer lines. Thanks guys for joining me on this trip through Cades Cove and the Great Smoky Mountains. It's getting dark and they're about to close off the loop for the evening, so we got up out of there and now it's time for us to move on to our next adventure. But if you liked today's adventure, make sure that you leave a thumbs up, subscribe. I put out new videos every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. So if you're interested in more, I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye guys!